Sorry, on this though, you have any reason to believe that the IDF claim is more credible than the MSF claim?
So both things can be true. What MSF claimed was that he was a doctor who was a member of MSF.
Okay.
What Israel claimed is that
that's wrong?
No, I'm not saying that's wrong. What Israel claimed is that he was a doctor who was a member of MSF who was also a terrorist involved in Palestinian Islamic Jihad's rocket program. My point is, neither of those are United States verified information.
Right,
so when I get asked about
the IDF claim, but he was a doctor and he was also involved in Hamas's missile program,
rocket program.
Rocket program. Yeah.
Yeah.
How?
But don't you make assessment to other countries when you don't have equally the same information? Whether it's Iran, whether it is China, whether even an ally, Russia or Ukraine or others. So is it just with Israel that you're always unable to make that conclusive results, or is it just because you don't have the information?
So first of all,
the judgment, the sentencing part of the judgment, the judge noted that there were no victims of Mr. Assange's behaviour, which is part of the reason that the sentence was what it was. Do you disagree with that? Do you think there were victims of his actions?
I'm not going to speak to a comment made by a judge in a ruling. It would never be appropriate for me to do so, but I stand by the comments I made just a moment ago.
What? You're not going to speak to a comment made by a judge. I mean, if he did, I don't know that he did, but that's exactly the point of my question.
Yeah, but I'm not.
Which is that the State Department has never come up, even though it was one of the prime quote unquote victims of these leaks, was never able to identify anyone who was killed or came under.
I think the point I made a moment ago is an appropriate response. Is just because the State Department was able to take actions to keep people out of harm's way, people that he put in harm's way, doesn't absolve responsibility.
What actions did the State Department take?
The State Department at the time was able to reach out to individuals whose names were going to be, I can't tell you that, it's almost 15 years ago, Matt, I wasn't here. Earlier today, Evan Gershkovich appeared in a courtroom in Yekaterinburg, Russia. We have been clear from the start that journalism is not a crime and that Evan should never have been detained in the first place. What happened today was a performance put on by Russian authorities to justify their repression of journalists and independent voices. Embassy Moscow officials were granted brief access to the courtroom before proceedings began. However, they were not permitted to speak to Evan. Russia should stop using individuals like Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan as bargaining chips. They should both be released immediately, and I can attest to both Evan and Paul and their families that the United States will not rest until we have brought both of them home. And then on one note, just much closer to home, so this is the last week of Nathan Tech, the deputy spokesperson, who is ending his tour in the spokesperson's office at the end of the week and moving on to hopefully greener pastures. He has been, agreed. Nathan has been an absolute joy to work with, one of the people that makes this place really work, does a lot of hard things and makes them look easy. And I've appreciated him, appreciated all his efforts on behalf of the spokesperson's office, and wish him well in his next endeavors. So thank you, Nathan. And with that, Matt.
Right, sorry, I was late, so I'll defer to.
Can we just follow up on Evan while
Sure.
you start with that? Given officials in the Biden administration have said, once a trial begins, it's not highly likely that there will be a deal to secure that person's release. Now that we're seeing this trial begin, what do you guys expect in terms of the likelihood of any deal coming to fruition in the near term here?
I don't want to make any kind of public assessment or speak to negotiations that happen, of course, in private. We have been working to bring both Evan and Paul home since they were detained. And as we've said, we have put a significant offer on the table some months ago. We continue to work privately to try to secure their release. We shouldn't have to do that. They should both be released immediately, but we will continue our efforts. Those have been happening before Evan's trial. They will continue during the trial, and should he be convicted, which of course he will be, it's not a free trial, they will continue after the trial, but we want to see him returned home immediately.
And that significant offer that you guys have repeatedly referred to that was put on the table months ago, has that offer been re-upped in any way or changed and put back on the table in any way? Or are we still standing at that singular offer that you guys keep pointing back to.
I just don't want to speak to this in public. I don't want to negotiate in public. I've seen that Russian officials have made comments about this matter in recent days, and I don't want to respond to those either. We are working day and night to try to secure the release of both Evan and Paul, and that will continue.
Just follow up.
Yeah.
If I understood correctly, the embassy officials were ushered out prior to the.
They were there before the start of the hearing, and then were not allowed to attend the hearing itself.
Thank you. What can you tell us about his condition? We also saw his pictures from this glass, behind the glass cage. Where is he being held right now during the trial?
I can follow up with you that off. I don't have it here at the podium. I can follow up with this where
Did
he's
they
being
have?
held off.
Did embassy officials have a chance to interact with him?
They did not. I said that in my opening statements.
And I know you guys don't typically get into politics from this podium, but given that it directly, intersects with your efforts to secure Evan, the former president, Trump, who's now the Republican nominee, said earlier that Evan would be released prior to him taking office if he wins the election on November 5th. Is there any legitimacy to that claim as far as this building knows?
So I am not going to deal with comments made in a political context in a political campaign, but I would note that I would hope that every American who cares about the safety and security of their fellow American citizens would demand the release of Evan and Paul now. Not November, not December, not January, but now. That ought to be the position of every American, because I would hope that every American citizen wants to see these two wrongfully detained Americans return home immediately. Anything else? Janie?
Thank you very much. And two questions. North Korea's launched another ballistic missiles early yesterday morning, and following the spray of garbage balloons into South Korea. Due to the impact of these trash balloons, operation at international airport are being disrupted and flight cancellation occurred. What comment can you make on this?
We continue to call on the DPRK to refrain from these provocative actions and return to diplomacy.
And the Russian deputy foreign minister said that South Korea must retaliate North Korea and Russia recent agreement. On the other hand, it was announced that the North Korean workers would be dispatched to reconstruction for Donetsk, Ukraine. How do you view this?
So I don't have any specific comment on that. I had not seen that report, but obviously we have been quite concerned about the burgeoning relationship between North Korea and Russia. Obviously Donetsk is part of Ukraine, not part of Russia. And so any kind of increased cooperation between those two countries when it relates to activities on occupied Ukrainian territory is something that we would oppose.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Moving on to Julian Assange, now that he's free and in Australia, are you satisfied with the outcome of this? And can you give us any details on the diplomatic negotiations that went ongoing between Australia, the U.S., U.K., and all that? Give us any light on that.
So with respect to the first question, I'm not going to have any comment, only because under our system we have an independent Justice Department that makes its own decisions on these matters, and it's appropriate that they be the ones that speak to them and not have other departments in the United States weighing in one way or the other. That has always been the case, but of course we have confidence in our colleagues at the Justice Department to make these decisions and make them in full with the full interest of the United States in mind. As it pertains to involvement of the State Department, I can tell you it was very limited. Only in the last few days, this was a matter that was handled by the Justice Department through law enforcement channels. There was some small coordination role between our embassy and the Australian government just in the past few days, but this was, other than that, a law enforcement matter handled through law enforcement channels.
But are you satisfied that the case is over?
So look, the Justice Department has spoken to that, and I don't have anything to add. Obviously, the ambassador put out a statement that said we were happy to work with our Australian colleagues on it, and that remains the case. I do think it is important when we talk about Julian Assange to remind the world that the actions for which he was indicted and for which he has now pled guilty are actions that put the lives of our partners, our allies, and our diplomats at risk, especially those who work in dangerous places like Afghanistan and Iraq. This was some years ago now, almost 15 years ago, so I think the world has forgotten much of it. But if you recall, when WikiLeaks first disseminated and published State Department documents, State Department cables, they did so without redacting names. They just threw them out there for the world to see. And so the documents they published gave identifying information of individuals who were in contact with the State Department. That included opposition leaders, human rights activists around the world, whose positions were put in some danger because of their public disclosure. It also chilled the ability of American personnel to build relationships and have frank conversations with them. And at the time, those of you who covered the State Department at the time will probably remember that in the days leading up to that release, the State Department really had to scramble to get people out of danger, to move them out of harm's way. It was an extraordinary effort performed by dozens of government officials around the world, but that doesn't change the danger that those actions put innocent people all around the world in through no fault of their own. And that's, of course, not even to mention the further actions by WikiLeaks down the road to essentially serve as a conduit for Russian intelligence interfering in the U.S. presidential election.
Sorry, so I actually did cover the State Department back then, and I don't remember there being any public, there was a public concern that was raised about the potential security risk posed to sources who might have been quoted. Was there actually any, did you ever discover anyone who was injured, killed, had to go into hiding because of them?
So a few things about that. One, I can't give you a definitive answer only because I wasn't here at the time and so much time. And
okay,
so, hold on. Let me finish. I have a full answer on it. One, I can't speak to that because it was some years ago and I don't have a full, accounting of what happened. But number two, the State Department did an extraordinary amount of work when we found out that these cables were going to be published to get people out of harm's way, to go around and look at what might become public and take action so people that would be put in danger would be put out of harm's way. But third, if you drive drunk down the street and get pulled over for drunk driving, the fact that you didn't crash into another car and kill someone doesn't get you out of the reckless actions and the endangerment that you put your fellow citizens in. And it's the same thing. The same principle applies here.
Right. Well, I don't think that it does. But the fact of the matter is that the State Department has been, at least as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong, but has never been able to point to anyone who was compromised or killed or put at risk because of this.
Their identities were compromised. The State Department went to great work to get people out of harm's way, to prevent that very action from happening.
Do you know how many people about?
As I said, this was some time ago. I was in the government at the time, not at the State Department. I'd have to go back and look at it, but I do know that there was work around the world, especially in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places around the world where they did have to do a great amount of work to kind of move people out of harm's way.
One of your predecessors, P.J. Crowley, who was standing at the podium at the time, went to great pains to talk about the potential damage that could or would be caused by these revelations. And unless I missed it, I didn't hear that there was any.
As I said, number one, the department went to a great amount of effort to avoid people being put in harm's way, but it doesn't absolve anyone of their responsibility. I know, but I know you're not. But it's an important point. Just because people were able to mitigate the harm done by your actions, that doesn't absolve you of your actions in the first place.
Okay.
Shannon, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
One other thing. You said there was some small coordination between the U.S. and Australia over the last couple of days. Was that involving the flight?
With relation to his landing and transfer in Australia. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up? It said in the agreement that
Mr. Assange will not be able to enter the United States without permission. Who will he be seeking permission from? Who would grant that permission, and how would that happen if that were to occur?
It would. So I'm not going to speak to provisions in what was a Justice Department plea agreement, but that would be handled, as is the case for anyone seeking permission to enter the United States.
And in the judgment, the sentencing part of the judgment, the judge noted that there were no victims of Mr. Assange's behaviour, which is part of the reason that the sentence was what it was. Do you disagree with that? Do you think there were victims of his actions?
I'm not going to speak to a comment made by a judge in a ruling. It would never be appropriate for me to do so, but I stand by the comments I made just a moment ago.
What? You're not going to speak to a comment made by a judge. I mean, if he did, I don't know that he did, but that's exactly the point of my question.
Yeah, but I'm not.
Which is that the State Department has never come up, even though it was one of the prime quote unquote victims of these leaks, was never able to identify anyone who was killed or came under.
I think the point I made a moment ago is an appropriate response to that, which is just because the State Department was able to take actions to keep people out of harm's way, people that he put in harm's way, it doesn't absolve a responsibility.
What actions did the State Department take?
The State Department at the time was able to reach out to individuals whose names were going to be, I can't tell you that, it's almost 15 years ago, Matt, I wasn't here.
Well, I know,
but
the case has just come to a close.
But I cannot give you a full account of something that happened almost 15 years ago, but people that were here will tell you that the State Department went to great lengths to reach out to people whose identities were exposed and get them out of harm's way. And the other point I made is that it does, when something like that happens, it does chill the ability of American personnel to build relationships with people and count on the fact that the information they provide us will be held confidential. So it is not just a harm to, or potential harm to the safety and security of those individuals. It's a harm to American diplomacy.
No doubt, but the fact of the matter is that you have not ever been able to identify anything tangible about any tangible negative effect.
That is a different. So I think I just did point to a tangible negative effect when people are less willing to trust the United States government.
Okay, well, give me an example.
Information's secret.
Who was willing to?
It was I was in government at the time, and I can tell you, traveling the world with a different a different agency, we often heard from foreign counterparts that they were. I'm obviously not going to speak to. I'm not going to speak to the exact conversations, but we often heard from foreign counterparts that they were worried about providing information to the United States government because of our ability to keep it.
Well, I remember one, having been here at the time, and I remember that Berlusconi told former Secretary Clinton that he was concerned, mainly because of what the WikiLeaks, what the cables suggested about his, activities and
there were
lifestyle.
there were more substantive and serious concerns. Yeah.
Were there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you name not a person? But country.
I think you could see why, if the point of the conversation is someone raising concern about private conversations being made public, it wouldn't be helpful for me to then make those private conversations public in response to a question at this
15 years ago. I'll drop it.
Thank you. On Gaza, 500,000 people are facing catastrophic level of hunger, especially in the north. And actually, WFP is describing the situation as full-blown famine. So what exactly are you doing to pressurize or persuade or cajole the Israelis to make sure that this is not going to happen and not materialize in actually a full famine?
So we continue to work day and night. Our special envoy for Middle East humanitarian issues is back in the region today after being back in Washington for consultations around Minister Gallant's visit. She's back in the region working on this exact issue today, trying to not just get humanitarian aid into Gaza, but most importantly, make sure it is distributed around Gaza. I think everyone's aware that that has been the chief impediment to actually getting food to the Palestinian people. It's not getting aid into the pier, it's not getting aid into Kerem Shalom, it's then making sure that it can be distributed from those points onward. We have had a number of discussions between, we have been involved in a number of discussions in the past few days between the various United Nations agencies and various components of the Israeli government to try to work through some security challenges that the UN is currently facing. To deliver humanitarian assistance. We continue to push to try to resolve their legitimate concerns about the safety and security of their personnel, and are continuing to push to try to work through some asks that they have on the table pending with the government of Israel to try to make it safer for their personnel to take humanitarian assistance and deliver it around to the people of Gaza.
That was my follow-up, actually, because the UN said that
I anticipated that.
I'm read my mind.
Or-
that Israel. So do you believe that actually the Israelis can improve the way that the UN agencies, especially their workers, are delivering the aid? It could be met.
Yeah, there are
So
a
the
number of
threat
things
won't
that
be followed through?
Israel can do. I spoke to some of them yesterday. Some of them is to allow protective personnel equipment, protective personal equipment for UN workers. Some is to kind of increase communications between the IDF and COGAD and UN workers. And then there's some other things too that the UN workers have asked for that I'm not going to get into from this podium, but there is more that can be done. There are some of the requests where Israel has legitimate security concerns, and what we're trying to do is broker agreements that give the UN personnel the assurances they need that they can offer that they can operate securely while still protecting Israel's legitimate security concerns.
One last question is, I'm sure you've seen these detailed reports that most of them have harrowing accounts of Palestinian prisoners being rounded up. Some of them are being sexually assaulted, shackled for hours, inhumane conditions, and that's a description of Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem and others, and witnesses who are actually a part of the IDF who came and talked about what happened. So you often call Israel as an ally who you shared values with. So how can the United States make sure that these things, which is obviously unacceptable for most democracies, that is not allowed to happen? What exactly are you doing? What the mechanism that you're using to make sure that this is not happening, and if you're investigating it yourself?
So with respect to any investigations, there are, as I've said before, a number of incidents that we are reviewing when it relates to potential human rights abuses, potential violations of the laws of war, and I'm not going to speak to any particular incident from here, but there are a number of incidents where we have reviews ongoing. But that said, separate and apart from that, we have made clear to Israel that we fully expect them to comply with all human rights laws, international laws of war. That includes the treatment of prisoners and detainees. And when there are abuses, those ought to be investigated. If accountability is appropriate, there ought to be accountability, and we'll continue to make that clear to them. Sure. Who was that? Who asked the question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow on that.
And I would say that's the last time today I'm going to do without raising hand, but go ahead.
Oh, I apologize. It was a follow on her. On investigation of the use of Palestinians as human shields, or video that was on social media today about Israeli forces using attack dogs. You talk about investigations. Logistically, what does an investigation look like, and when would we see results of that type of investigation?
So it depends whose investigation you're speaking to. If you mean the reviews that are going on by the United States, there are personnel inside the State Department that conduct reviews with respect to the laws of war in this conflict, as we do in other places around the world. And I don't speak to those reviews before they're finalized, nor can I preview when they would be finished. But just to speak to some of the complexity that we face in launching those reviews, and it's the same complexity I face sometimes in answering questions about this from the podium. So yesterday, Doctors Without Borders put out a statement saying that a doctor who was a member of Doctors Without Borders was killed by an IDF strike while, I believe, on his way to work inside Gaza. I was asked about it at the podium. I said, I can't give you an assessment on that strike because I don't know the details. Hours later, the IDF put out a statement saying that particular doctor was also a terrorist member of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who was a member of a participant in their rocket program. I don't have the ability to litigate that claim. We don't, at first blush, often have the ability to litigate claims made by the different parties in this conflict. And so I know sometimes when I'm asked to pronounce judgment, it's frustrating that we can't do it. But the incident yesterday is the exact situation why oftentimes in the middle of a conflict, it is difficult to draw definitive conclusions when there is conflicting information that we all face. So I will say, as it pertains to our reviews, we collect information from all the relevant parties. As we said when we released a report on this matter some time ago, we have open inquiries to the government of Israel asking for information about these specific incidents, and we'll continue. Those reviews will continue.
Sorry, on this, though, do you have any reason to believe that the IDF claim is more credible than the MSF claim?
So both things can be true. What MSF claimed was that he was a doctor who was a member of MSF.
Okay.
What Israel claimed is that
that's wrong?
No, I'm not saying that's wrong. What Israel claimed is that he was a doctor who was a member of MSF who was also a terrorist involved in Palestinian Islamic Jihad's rocket program. My point is, neither of those are United States verified information.
Right,
so when I get asked about
the IDF claim, but he was a doctor and he was also involved in Hamas's missile program?
Rocket program.
Rocket
program.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How?
I don't know. That goes to my.
Didn't the IDF tell you?
They put out a statement on this. This goes to my exact point that you see claims made by various parties on the ground, and then oftentimes you see conflicting claims made by the IDF. We will reach out to our Israeli partners about. We will reach out to our Israeli partners for more information about these. But oftentimes when I'm asked for definitive conclusions about the specifics of a strike, we are operating on incomplete information, and that's why as frustrating as it is why I can't offer a definitive conclusion about any one strike.
There are plenty of instances in history where physicians have been, also criminals of some kind.
That's my point. Yeah.
But you're just saying, well, MSF, which is a respectable organization, IDF, a respectable organization, but they have completely different views. So you guys need to come in and in the middle and decide what,
And that's,
don't you?
That is what we do with respect to the ongoing assessments. That's the point I was making, 2 points I was making. One, with respect to ongoing assessments, when you look at that information environment, sometimes that's why it takes time to reach a definitive conclusion, because things aren't as simple as they appear at first blush, right? I get a question about it. Hold on. I get a question about it yesterday.
No, it could be as simple as they were at first blush. You just don't know.
Exactly right. And you don't know. The second thing is that's why it's hard oftentimes to give definitive answers when I get asked about this from the podium, because information changes, more information comes to light, and maybe that information is correct, maybe it's not. We try to gather it and make definitive determinations.
But Matt, don't you make assessment to other countries when you don't have equally the same information? Whether it's Iran, whether it is China, whether even an ally, Russia or Ukraine or others. So is it just with Israel that you're always unable to make that conclusive results, or is it just because you don't have the information?
So first of all, I would say there are times when it is quite obvious what happened, and we do make specific determinations very quickly. So look at the World Central Kitchen strike, where it's quite obvious within a few hours, within certainly the first 24 hours, what happened and that it was a mistaken strike, and we spoke to that exactly. Other times, it is less clear. So that's the first thing. But then I would say, with respect to Israel, as with any other country, we make determinations based on the information that's available to us. We reach out, in this case, to NGOs and others who are on the ground, and we reach out to the government of Israel when trying to make assessments about individual strikes before making any definitive conclusions.
But you do accept at least what both sides agree on, that this person was a doctor.
I have no reason to dispute that. I have no reason to dispute at all that he was a doctor.
And to be clear, sorry.
Yeah.
And
that's funny.
Sorry, no laughing matter. But and to be clear, you have explicitly asked Israel for evidence that this doctor was involved in Hamas.
I don't know if we have pertains to this strike. We often do.
Will you?
Hold on. I'm saying we often do when it comes to strikes like these, when there are claims of human rights abuses or claims of civilian casualties. It is regular practice for us to do so through our embassy in Jerusalem. I can't say we've done so in this case, but it would be normal practice for us to have done so. I just haven't verified that we did in this one specific one, or that we're not doing it in the coming days, but it would be our standard practice to do so, yes.